Welcome to A Call to Action, a series presented by Great Eastern Radio and Brattleboro Community Television. We're covering many different topics from sheltering in place orders to our savings accounts. Today, we'll be speaking with Vermont Congressman Peter Welch, and we'll try to cover as much ground as possible. There's a lot of moving targets here. First and foremost, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're doing this. I mean, everybody is so desperate to get information.
It is really, it's been in a landscape that is forever changing as well, and the information changes on a daily basis. First things first, are you sheltering in place in Vermont or in DC?
I am. I am. I'm in my kitchen slash dining room, and definitely sheltering in place. I mean, I went up to a press conference with the governor yesterday, but Margaret and I are being pretty careful. I mean, bottom line, the best way for us to get through this is to avoid as much as we can contact. And it's pretty tough for folks to do that because emotionally, when there is a big challenge, remember Irene? Everybody with a pickup truck or a backhoe or a shovel just wanted to rush to the danger zone and start repairing. Whereas in this case with a virus, we have to keep apart, and it calls for restraint in cooperation. So it's a real challenge, but it's really important that we keep our social distance, and that's the point the governor has been repeatedly making.
Yeah, and it's a solid message. It's one I stand behind, and we're just hoping that everybody else takes it seriously. Because I don't need to tell you this, but the faster we sort of comply to those suggestions, the quicker we get through this.
Well, see, that's exactly right, and that's the thing that we all have to have some confidence in. I mean, there is real science behind this. If we don't flatten the curve, what it means is you get that big spike. That means that the virus is going to overwhelm our hospitals. We're not going to be able to give to people the treatment they need. And what I understand is that more people will eventually get infected. So waiting to take preventive action only makes a bad situation catastrophic. So we've got to go big. And the more we cooperate on the social distancing, the sooner, we're going to protect the family that we love and the Vermonters we all care about. And B, the sooner our economy is going to get back to normal.
Right. Let's, speaking of economy, it's a good segue. The Senate just approved a $2 trillion stimulus bill. What does that mean for Vermonters? How quickly will those funds become available?
Well, let me go through it from top to bottom here. I mean, first of all, let's put this in context. Who would have thought, just a week ago Saturday, I was in DC at 1 a.m. We were voting on the second response that was getting medical help back, some unemployment benefits back, some food security benefits back. But we did that with 600 people on the House floor, all 435 members of Congress or so, and lots of staff. So we weren't even into that acknowledgement and acceptance that social distancing had to take place. So this has all happened at warp speed. And what has happened since with this $2 trillion package, passed by a unanimous vote in the Senate. Can you imagine Mitch McConnell's Senate is agreeing to $2 trillion to try to shore up the economy?
Yeah.
And that's a reflection of the awareness that on the economic side, just as on the healthcare side, we've got to do something big and immediate in order to help people get through this. Because what has more or less happened is that the public health response we need, and that's social distancing, really has as a consequence the large-scale shutting down of our economy. So basically everybody's on sick leave in this country. That's more or less what's happening, except for our first responders and people in so-called critical jobs. So that just means that how do you deal with that? And what we're saying in this $2 trillion legislation is that we've got to borrow money and get it back to people, to small businesses, to hospitals, and to our states to have an economic backstop to help us get through. So here's what it means for individuals, because they're on the front line, especially folks who work in paycheck to paycheck jobs. And that's most of Vermonters. You know, it's not like you can just go home and be without a paycheck for a month or two or three. You've got rent, you've got groceries, you've got all those things that you pay for by your weekly paycheck. So here's what's happening. Number one, there are going to be individual checks going out. And if anyone who makes up to $99,000, $150,000 for a couple, will be eligible, and that's $1,200 per person. So if you're a family of four, there could be 12 for the two partners, and then $500 per kid, up to $3,400. So that's going to mean something in the short term. And the Secretary of Treasury says those will be going out within 3 weeks. So immediate checks to individuals. Second, if you have to go on unemployment, then you're going to be able to get not only the benefits you would get under the Vermont unemployment system, and that can be up to a little over $500 a week. There's an additional $600 a week that would come through the federal government to supplement that unemployment. And that could be up to 4 months, because we don't know how long we're going to be on this shutdown in effect. So those unemployment benefits can make a huge difference. And what I think is so important about the unemployment, we're extending eligibility to folks who are self-employed or they're so-called independent contractors, namely they work in the gig economy. And as you know, more and more people are in those categories, self-employed or gig economy. They haven't in the past been eligible for unemployment. They are under this legislation. So that's the help to individuals. To our small businesses, a couple of things. I mean, this is so hard because, you know, for Vermont employers, it's like family for most of our small businesses. And the folks who work there, it's not just a job, it's a place to contribute, it's a place to socialize. You know, our small businesses are incredibly important financially and for our emotional well-being. And a lot of the employers I've talked to, they're just devastated trying to figure out what to do with their employees and worried about whether when the lights go on, they're going to be able to turn them on back in their business. So the small businesses can get about 250% of their payroll as a loan that turns into a grant if they use that essentially to continue the wages for their employees. And by the way, one of the concerns I've heard from our small businesses is they might have younger employees who don't know whether they're going to be able to be here in a couple of months when we go back to business. Well, if those folks are getting a paycheck and are able to survive, the likelihood that they'll be around to go back to work is much greater. So we've got the small business, the individuals, the small businesses. And then our hospitals, they've all been hammered. And the reason they have is that because we have not had the personal protective equipment we need, the mask that we need, the hospitals were more or less ordered to discontinue doing elective surgeries. And their whole revenue model depends on being able to do those elective procedures in addition to the regular care, non-elective. And they've taken a huge revenue hit. There's in this bill, there's over $100 billion where we're going to be helping directly with financial payments to our hospitals. And that's going to enable them to face this challenge of the surge in care that they're going to have to provide. And then finally, we're going to write a check to the states. You know, in Vermont, we've been seeing Governor Scott just lay out what the financial implications are. Our tax revenues are collapsing, and that's going to be true across the country. Yet, as they go down, the expenses go up as the state tries to respond to these challenges. So Senator Leahy worked really hard on this. He's, as you know, the senior appropriator in the Senate. And the state of Vermont, along with other states, will get money from the federal government to help with the COVID-19 response. So there's a huge financial response here. And I think, frankly, it's big, but just the beginning. So, you know, the approach we're taking, both on public health and on the economy is to go big, and go soon. And my view is that both with respect to the social distancing and with our economic response, we want to err on the side of doing too much too soon, not doing too little too late.
I wholeheartely agree, and I think that is it's comforting to me to know that is the approach. Let me drill into a few things here that I wanted to ask. Now, given the best way to ensure low-income children have access to food, it's provided by SNAP benefits to families, also known locally as Three Squares Vermont. And has there been any consideration of a 3 to 4 month increase to SNAP benefits? I know, because right now a lot of these nonprofits and food shelves are having to find and fill those gaps themselves. And I think this speaks in large part to the bill that was passed, but not knowing what direction and
Right.
how easily it's going to be to fill those gaps. Is there any such conversation happening around SNAP benefits?
Yes, there is an immense amount of conversation around SNAP benefits, and you're exactly right. And what we've seen, by the way, is first of all, the obvious: kids got to eat. Seniors, we all have to eat, and there's a lot of food security in this state that has preceded this COVID-19 crisis. What we've done in this legislation, and I'm still myself learning some of the details, is we've supplemented the SNAP programs with some additional funding. I don't believe we've increased the benefits, and there are many of us who are advocating that is something we should have done and still need to do. But we're shoring up the financial underpinning of the SNAP program. Second, we have changed the rules to provide a lot of flexibility. Kids getting nutrition at school had to be in school, and that was a condition. And obviously they're not when our schools are closed. So we've waived that school-based requirement, and we have the state now using the bus routes to deliver meals to kids at home. And that's a tremendous benefit, because those kids wouldn't have that food. And we're doing more for seniors. We did put additional money in the senior meal programs. And again, those are going to be delivered because it's obviously a pretty vulnerable population. So we've gotten rid of the work requirement. I mean, who's going to go to work or even look for work when we're all told we can't work?
Right.
So some common sense things that should have been done, we did. And I'm glad to say that. But I do think that down the road, we're going to need to add to that. And by the way, I've talked to a number of our food shelves, and the demand for them is it's enormous. And I say thank you to not just our food shelf folks, but to our grocers, the clerks and folks who are in those stores and keeping them open so we can, and they're stocking the shelves so that we can go in and buy the groceries we need. They're on the front line, and my gratitude to them for doing their job under pretty dangerous circumstances.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's, they're having to deal with people who are short in patience, who are scared, having to exercise a lot of, a lot of self-care while they're dealing with people who are very upset. So they have, you won't get an argument out of me. They've been doing a tremendous job. The local Brattleboro Food Co-op has been offering curbside. They'll bring stuff right out to your car,
Right.
that stuff in place. So, and again, under the guise of nobody pandemics well,
Yeah.
we have these things that are being deployed and kind of made
Mhm.
up. And again, the landscape constantly changing.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it's true.
let me drill into this. Did have a question about SNAP benefits for seniors, but you've answered that in your answer about the one for kids. So again, with the understanding that a pandemic is something that none of us have ever had to deal with before, how frustrating has it been to try to wrangle support and not turn everything into some partisan line?
Well, surprisingly, and thankfully, that has not been a big issue. There was a difference in emphasis when we were putting together the economic package. And I think it's fair to say the emphasis on the Trump administration was more towards industry. The emphasis, I think, on the Democratic side, but with a lot of my Republican colleagues, was on immediate aid to individuals. And the design of this legislation, the $2 trillion, I think does focus primarily, but not exclusively, on trying to help individuals, to help states, and help our hospitals. And the argument there is not just that, though, it's partly that's, you can't show up for work, you lose your paycheck. What are you going to do when you're being told, even if you want to go to work, you can't? Well, obviously, the government's got to help. That's what the federal government is for. And we had some legitimate policy debates, which I do not see as partisan wrangling. I see that as folks having a point of view and making the arguments. And those were resolved in a way that gives me some confidence. And they were resolved in that we got a 96-0 vote in the U.S. Senate. And when's the last time you heard about that other than the naming of a post office? And this is on a $2 trillion package. And I expect we'll have a pretty solid bipartisan vote in the House as well. The reality is, as you know, I mean, this virus knows no political boundaries. And what's happening to us here in Vermont is happening to folks in Louisiana, Indiana, Oklahoma, a lot of the red states. So this is an instance where, despite the fact that Washington is an extremely divided place on this $2 trillion response, I mean, the biggest appropriation I'll ever have voted on, we came together and are going to get near unanimous support. And that's essential. And I think, we're seeing in Vermont, we got Governor Scott, a Republican, leading the way. The governors have the primary responsibility to make decisions about the health actions that we take, like the executive order he just issued about just not all of us staying home except for essential employees. And then the federal government, we've got me, Bernie, and Patrick, two Democrats and an independent. Our job is to help get that money back to Vermonters and Vermont so that they can meet the health objectives that the governor's laying out. So we're working together, and that's essential in a time when we've got such a crisis.
I know. And the reason I pose the question is because anybody who spends any amount of time on social media, it would seem like everybody was fighting tooth and nail and nobody wanted to pass the bill. So for somebody who is inside the Beltway, as yourself, trying to get these questions answered, I wanted people to understand that I think that this was not a time for partisan divide. I think that there were just a few things that needed to be changed. And just kind of saying that you all are working together for the greater good to help out the, Americans, Vermonters, Granite Staters, whatever, Bay Staters, everybody is in this thing together.
Right. Yeah, thank you. That is really important. Let's hope we can maintain that approach. I mean, this is going to take constancy on the part of each of us. Each of us has to do what we can, that social distancing. But this is creating a lot of insecurity, obviously, economically. And, I keep thinking that the emotional burden on all of us is great because we're fearful that we might get it, but more fearful that somebody we love is going to get the disease. We're scared about that. And we've got kids, family members, all around the country, and we're kind of check in with them. So there's a lot of anxiety there. But if you're a person who, in addition to that, has just lost their paycheck because you work in a bar, you work in a restaurant, you work in a factory that's had to close down, and you don't know how you're going to pay your rent, the anxiety of that financial stress adds an enormous burden. And that's why I'm really relieved that we're going to get some relief back to everyday Vermonters, and soon.
Congressman Peter Welch, thank you for jumping on a call to action and kind of leveling the playing field and giving us the good information. And by all means, continue the good work that you're doing on behalf of Vermonters and, of course, citizens of the United States.
And you too. You're the link. Keep it up.
All right, we will do. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.